The Isaiah Factor Uncensored starts right now.
And welcome to The Factor Uncensored, and thanks for joining us. We begin tonight with another tragic shooting developing in Tulsa, Oklahoma, a medical center at the center of this country's latest incidents of gun violence. A gunman shot and killed 4 people before turning the gun on himself. This comes just 1 week after a gunman terrorized an elementary school campus. The Texas Department of Public Safety is trying to investigate why Uvalde Police, both city and the school district force, waited to rescue those 21 victims who are now dead, never rescued. Police and school district officials aren't showing their hands in the matter. They're both no longer cooperating with the investigation. My guests tonight address the issue. We want to know how police can just walk away from an investigation like this.
No, as I said, this is something unheard of, in my opinion. I've never seen a law enforcement agency refuse to cooperate with state agencies in any type of investigation, because it brings into question their integrity. And it seems like you're actively working to cover something up. And so I don't see why they would want to do something this idiotic when the integrity of the department is already in question. This just seems to make it a bad situation worse.
State Representative Ron Reynolds, let's bring you into this conversation. Obviously, this is something that state lawmakers won't stand for. So how do you address it when members of the law enforcement community are saying, we're not going to talk right now? Sorry, we understand 21 people are dead, a tremendous failure on our part, but we're just not interested in talking to investigators.
Isaiah, I think that Gregory is right. This adds insult to injury. Already the parents were dealing with so much grief and angst. They deserve transparency. There needs to be accountability. These officers need to, it looks like they made some serious mistakes. They need to own up to it, provide and cooperate with the investigating authorities. DPS, I've been briefed that they are trying to diligently seek answers. There was a cover-up. There was basically lies. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. There were lies. They misled government officials as to what their actions were. They need to fully cooperate so that we can do lessons learned to ensure that nothing ever happens again. And then ultimately, there should be accountability.
Now, when we talk about they, let's get some specificity on this. They being who lied? From what you have, from the knowledge that you have, the information you've been provided.
The information that I have is the local police department and the local ISD with Uvalde. Those are the local officials that were on the ground, the chief of police there, as well as the school district police. They were working in concert. And so the locals, the Texas Rangers, the Texas Department of Public Safety, they're investigating this. Also, if they need to be subpoenaed, then that will be the next step. Long and short, they will be made to account for what they did. They should do it voluntarily to cooperate. That's in good faith. Right now, it looks like that they're trying to hide the ball, like they don't want to really own up to what took place.
And I think the ISD police chief, he was recently, as recent as last night, I think, was sworn in as a city council member, and still wouldn't address the issue about the shooting, the Uvalde shooting. Frank Spagnoletti, as an attorney watching this, your thoughts on this?
Well, first of all, there's nothing to be said about the actual event that happened, except a tragedy, and my, heartfelt sympathy for all of those families, having just suffered something not nearly as grave, but similar in my own life. But may I say that I believe, from a law point of view, that these police officers are probably being advised by lawyers not to speak, because there's a question here of whether or not they were so negligent that they could be charged. And in these circumstances, I think that they made mistakes. They certainly didn't deliberately do anything. They might have made terribly gross negligent mistakes. But when the beat gets going with regard to holding someone responsible, and the person responsible was this insane person with this gun who shot these people, but that's the proximate cause of the injury. But there are other potential causes of multiple deaths, which have to do with how the police responded. I imagine, and I'm not there, but I imagine that they are being advised by counsel, by lawyers, not to speak, because there could be attempts to have a grand jury charge somebody with negligent homicide. I agree with all of our two other guests on the show, but at the same time, and I agree with transparency and all the rest, but I also know that from just, if you're looking at me as a lawyer, forensically, if I were advising those officers, I would probably tell them, don't speak until we know all the facts, until we know what all the facts are, all the stories are. And even then, you have the right to the Fifth Amendment if you feel like you might be in danger. Okay. So I think that they are probably prudently being advised by lawyers not to talk anymore because they screwed it up.
So even though, Frank, it just looks bad, what's best for them and in their best interest now is to shut the hell up.
Yeah. I mean, look, I agree with the transparency. If somebody gives them immunity, I imagine you're going to have a lot of people speaking about a lot, but there is some immunity with them already. With regard to them being police officers in the line of duty and all the rest of that, and the qualified immunity and all that stuff that goes with it in terms of a civil lawsuit. But in terms of a criminal case of some kind, I imagine that, they do have their rights to be quiet and assert the Fifth Amendment. And I think some prudent lawyers are probably telling them to shut up until everybody knows the facts.
And State Representative Ron Reynolds, that's a conversation the general public hadn't heard much about, that these officers, the responders, the first responders who failed miserably through admission of the state, could face some type of criminal charges. Have you guys talked about that? Is that something on the table?
Isaiah, I think everything's on the table. Nothing has been specifically discussed with respect to criminal liability or criminal prosecution. From what I was told by the Speaker in the House and the Governor's office is that they are going to do all of their due diligence to investigate the facts fully. That means they need their cooperation. They need to get their full version of what happened. Now that they have a timeline, they want to go back and ask them pointed questions. Now they're retreating. They're not really owning up to what they said before and admitting that they intentionally misled the state when they gave their initial account of what happened. Now we know they flat out lied. They didn't encounter the suspect. They did withhold the fact that there wasn't an officer there on the scene when the shooter arrived. So there were some specific details and facts that they let out. And then you heard the 911 calls from the students that they basically ignored. So we know that they could have intervened sooner. That is unquestionable. They could have intervened sooner. We believe that they possibly could have saved lives. That the question is, how many lives could they have saved? We don't know the answer to that.
And is that a road you think state officials will travel, Greg, potentially looking at criminal charges against these law enforcement officers who dropped the ball?
Well,
should they, from your opinion, should they?
I do believe that they should. And if history is any indication, taking into consideration what happened in Parkland, where those officers were incompetent and failed to act, they pursued criminal charges against them. You saw the same thing in Las Vegas with the Vegas shooters. You had officers that refused or didn't act when they could have saved lives, and you saw some action taken against them as well. So I'd be very surprised if there wasn't some type of criminal proceedings against at least some of the people involved in this crime. You know, as I said, something like this, I'm not gonna say it's unprecedented, but I've never seen anything like this happen before. To the attorney's point, I agree with what he says that, they're probably being advised to keep their mouths shut. But, from the leadership at the top, they should be the ones that should be cooperating more than anybody else, until we get to the bottom of this thing. Now you're stepping into another political position. As I said before, this goes directly to the integrity of that department and those two departments and the people that are involved.
All right, gentlemen, thank you for joining us here on The Factor Uncensored. Obviously, we'll continue to monitor this case and see what happens. Thank you all.
And of course, the district attorney in that area said that they are monitoring this situation. So there's a possibility of criminal charges. When we come back, we're disgusted by a state senator in Louisiana who says if it weren't for black women, Louisiana's maternal mortality rate would be a whole lot better. Take a look.
I'd like just even the four of us just to be in the room with him and see if he really has the, can I say it, the balls to say what he just said?